All right, we're speaking with Christine Sterling today, one of the authors on Barr26 Publishing. Christine, how are you?
I am great this morning. Thank you so much for having me here, Rick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great as well. I'm really glad to be talking to you today. You are a very prolific author. And yeah, tell me, do you have an approximate number how many books you've published?
Approximately 75 or 76. I think that was the last count. I honestly lost count after 60, just because I've started releasing them so quickly. It's like, okay, here's another one, and we'll put it out. But this is probably a really good exercise for me to sit down and actually count them. Because when you go on Amazon and you look and it says you've released this number of books, it's really not that number, because they count different versions. Here's your paperbacks, here's your earbooks, and then your audio books, of course. So but yeah, my last count I think was around 75, 76.
Okay. And how long have you been publishing?
I published my first Western historical romance back in 2017 to Crickets, and I did not publish anything else for nearly a year because I didn't know what I was doing. I had always wanted to be a romance writer, and I had published romances way back when, but never self-published or indie published anything. So I decided I need to get a little more education. And somebody took me under their wing. And in 2018 is when I truly consider myself being indie published, because there was such a big gap between when my first book hit and then when I joined a MAP and got my career really rolling.
Okay. So that first book you published, you say you didn't know what you were doing. And I think that goes for most people. We have the opportunity to publish, but it doesn't mean we have the skills necessary to, like you said, you released to Crickets. So
Correct.
You did that, and I'm sure it was a fun, kind of a big moment for you, but then afterwards you just didn't see anything happening with it. That had to be a little disappointing.
Well, it was, in a way. You kind of have these dreams of fanfare. Yay, I've released my first book. And I remember getting my first review, and I was absolutely devastated because, well, it is what it is. I'm actually a writer. I'm a professional writer. That was my career. But writing for other people in technical writing, because I was writing software manuals and I was writing speeches and articles and things like that, and translating that to fiction writing, two completely different things. So I consider myself a very strong writer. And so my story was great. And I got a lot of positive feedback on my story and my character development and settings and the world building. But then it just got down to a lot of nuances. The formatting for KDP, for example, there's a specific formatting that you need to use so that the document would roll properly. I'm used to technical documents, so I formatted it like a technical document. They're making sure that, because I was writing historical documents, the vernacular, the settings, things, making sure that the items were appropriate for the year. So now if you were to look at my search history, it's like, when was this phrase first used? When was this thing invented? What did they call X, Y, or Z in 1870, for example? So I've really developed my own skill set and worked with other authors as well to make sure that my books are on point, as well as the standard things such as the formatting, making sure that I have proper editors and beta readers, and that I don't have the plot holes or the gaps or anything in my story.
I would think, coming from a technical writing background, that the fact checking and all the research kind of comes naturally to you, though.
It does. I absolutely love it. That's one of the most favorite parts of my job as an author, is when I develop the story and I figure out where I'm going to put it, what year I'm going to put it in. sometimes I get into the minutia of, okay, this is what a kitchen looks like. And did they have stoves, and what type of stoves did they have? Or were they cooking over an open hearth? And, did they have the iron arm that swung out? And what type of Dutch ovens did they have? And did they have the spider, which is the cast iron skillet on the 3 legs? So I will actually get into the details about that. And sometimes I can go down a rabbit hole, and before I know it, it's like 2.5 hours are gone. And I'm like, well, I could have written how many words in that time?
Yeah, but I think that's great that you do pay such attention to detail. And I would think that a lot of your readers, they're reading historical fiction because they want to know about that. So it's kind of important to be factual.
Yes, it is. I've read authors where they have not been, historically factual. I have also edited books because I do peer-to-peer reviews. So I've read books where I'll push back and I'll say, well, this isn't exactly what they would say, what a character would say, or this isn't exactly a tool that they would use, or they might call it something else. And it's really an interesting conversation, because then I can talk to somebody about why it's called whatever it is. For example, bread making. They need the bread, and sometimes they have these dough bowls that they would put it in. In Pennsylvania, they will actually need the bread inside a bowl. They've got these big long troughs. And when did those troughs come out, and what were they made of? What type of wood were they made out of? Were they, how did they smooth them? How did they make them smooth? So, it's pretty interesting, the different things that occurred around the country, because how they might do something on the East Coast is definitely different how they would do something Midwest versus the West Coast.
Wow. Okay. That's an extraordinary level of detail there, even to get regional like that. And certainly I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, it's quite a bit, and I have spreadsheets upon spreadsheets of things that just keep me organized. And
wow,
yeah, and that goes back to my project manager days of managing technical projects and technical writing projects, where you have all of these little things that you have to keep straight.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny, because even when I go back and I look at my older series, or even the series that I'm doing now, I can always go back to a spreadsheet and I can say, well, what color was somebody's eyes, or their hair color, or something like that? Or what did I call a specific building, and what was the building comprised of? For example, if somebody has a hotel, where was the counter or the bar, and did they have the cubby holes in the back, or did they have the cubby holes under the desk? Silly things. I wrote a book about an apothecary, and back in the apothecary, I thought that they would have like little envelopes where they would put the herbs in, or they would have little jars. Shipping jars out to the Midwest really was not a thing because of shipping costs. So they actually had to make their own little envelopes to wrap up herbs in, or medicines. So that was kind of interesting. That took me down a rabbit hole for a while.
Oh, I'm sure. It's great that you keep track of all that. I'm sure, going back to reference it, you just pop in a keyword.
Correct.
And then even if it's not there, you just add it as you go. So, wow. So that first book that you wrote or published, was that part of a series, or was it just a one-off?
No, it was part of a series. And I absolutely love the title, and I'm actually very embarrassed to even talk about it. It was about a mail order bride, because that's what I write, is mail order brides, going out to a little town in the Midwest. And to me, at that point, I made the Midwest Illinois. So they were heading out to Illinois. And I'm like, they should have gone further out.
Oh.
That should have been the first thing. And so I just look back. I made so many mistakes with this book. I've actually pulled the books, and I'm in the process of completely rewriting them, retitling them, recovering them, and I will be re-releasing them later this year.
Oh, wow. Okay. Boy, that's a big project.
It is, but currently they are 4 books. I did not complete the series because I was so embarrassed. My 4th book in the series was actually really good. It was the best book because I had done the characterization and the plot development and all of those little details that I didn't do in the first 2 books. But there are 3 other books that came after that, so I kind of let the series die because I was like, I just can't finish it. And sometimes as authors, I think we do that. We're like, I've just had enough of the world because it's kind of dragged us down.
Yeah.
But I owe that to my readers. I owe them to finish the series. And I know that they want to see the series come to fruition. So that's one of my goals this year, is to go and rework the first 4 books, or the first 3, because 4 was really good, rebrand it, recover it, and re-release it.
Well, great. It's always very gratifying you have enough support and enough fans to make it worth doing in the first place.
I would like to think so. I love my readers.
So one big series that you're part of is the Blizzard Brides. Mm-hmm. Give us an idea what that's about. I mean, we kind of know it's mail order brides, right?
Actually, it's not.
Oh, okay.
It is not mail order brides. It's a twist on the mail order bride trope. It is mail order grooms. Uh-huh. And yeah, so what the Blizzard Brides is, the series was developed based upon 2 actual events that happened. One was called the Children's Blizzard, and then the other one was the Blizzard of 1888. And so a group of authors and I got together, and we were trying to think of a concept to replace a series that was faltering. And so I had just seen the episode of Little House on the Prairie. It had come up on reruns about the Children's Blizzard. And I was like, well, this would be an interesting concept because, you take your inspiration from where you can. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, what about if we had a town where we killed off the population and we had to start over again?
Well, there's a dark start to that.
It is a dark start. But I said, we could do that. And, we go down the whole what if game. What if this happens? And then what if that happens? And then what if the other happens? And then how would we solve that? So we came up with the idea of the Blizzard Brides by having a very small town in Nebraska along the river have a squall storm. So this blizzard comes through, basically covers the town, and because nobody was prepared for it, of course, people are trapped outside. The animals are trapped outside. People take shelter where they can. And we focused on a group of about 20 women who ended up losing their spouses because they went out on a hunting trip to find food. So we knew that these men were out in the middle of the plains somewhere without shelter, without any way of protecting themselves. So we didn't make it graphic. We didn't do anything. This is what it is. They're gone. And then we came up with a very interesting character, Pastor Collins, who decided, that these women cannot be out here in the middle of Midwest, unmarried. They cannot do anything on their own. They're delicate flowers, and they are going to have to get married. So they're either going to have to get married to somebody in town. Somebody's going to have to marry him to set the precedent for everything. Well, nobody wants to marry him because he's very, I don't want to say arrogant, because he's not arrogant, but he has some very strange ideas. And so the idea came across that anybody would be better than Pastor Collins, or having him select men for them to marry. So they get the idea of putting an ad in the paper and sending for mail order grooms. Mm-hmm. And all the letters come in, and basically it's a lottery system. They pick the letters and they end up meeting their matches.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great premise. It's pretty unique. And I suppose it's kind of a given in some ways what the ending is going to be. There's always a happy ending, right?
Always a happy ending.
Okay. So how many books have you actually written in this series? I'm
thinking.
Okay.
I am. Okay. Well, I wrote the introduction, which is what kicked off the series. So it was just a very short story that set up the intro. And then I wrote A Groom for Heather, who is the midwife in the town. Groom for Millie, who's a school teacher. Groom for Lauren. Groom for Fancy, who is Pastor Collins's. So 5. I wrote 5 in the series.
Okay. So you wrote the first one. Whose idea was it? Whose concept was this? Was it actually yours?
It was mine. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I lead multiple multi-author projects. Say that 10 times real fast.
No thanks.
So, yeah. So what it is I actually come up with the concept, and then I will invite authors to write into my world.
Wow. Okay. How do you? I mean, I guess you're vetting people, maybe some you've known already and worked with. Mm-hmm. How do you go about the process of making sure that all the authors are on the same page as far as the characters? Because I know from doing some of these, from narrating some of these, that they can be independent stories, but of course you're all connected. So you have characters bleed in from other books.
Yes. When you're talking about an interconnected series, you can do interconnected standalones, which means that there's just an overarching concept or theme. For example, we're all going to do mail order brides headed west. So that's the overarching theme. And, you can write your own story, but everything has to happen within a certain time period, and you must have this one element related to it. For example, and this was not my series, but there was Lockets and Lace, which was done by a wonderful author. And the overarching concept was you can write your story, but you must have a locket in it. So there has to be this locket that brings people together. So that was the overarching theme, and none of the stories were connected to each other. One of the stories or multi-author projects that I created was called the Proxy Brides. So the stories did not interconnect. And the only thing that had to happen in the overarching theme was that the man and the woman had to get married without knowing or meeting each other. So they had to get married via proxy, which means somebody had to stand in for them. So it was basically a marriage of convenience for some reason, without them getting to know each other or getting to meet each other first. So they were really taking their chances then. Now, inside the world, somebody might have their own little world. So inside the Proxy Brides, for example, my 3 books were definitely interconnected because my 3 people went to the same town. So they all crossed over. But another author in the series, my books would not be connected to their books, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Okay. So then you look at a big series such as like the Blizzard Brides or the Pinkerton Matchmakers or Last Chance Brides. Trying to think of what some of the other series are, or Silver Pines. These are very specific series with specific guidelines that the authors have to work in. So the world is set up by the creator, and the creator says, these are the parameters. It takes place in this year. It takes place in this town. These are the main characters in this, these are the characters that you can pick from to use in your book. For example, Pastor Collins appears in every single Blizzard Brides books. In the Last Chance series, he appears in some of the books because it takes place 15 years in the future. Yeah. So also in the Blizzard Brides books, we put together a core group of women, and they appear in some of the stories. Alter, who was a character that Parker J. Cole created, she is a seamstress. She is constantly populating the town, we'll say, for lack of a better word. But she appears in a lot of stories. So that is a character that Parker developed that we had permission to use. Gotcha. In the Last Chance Brides, we used her grandmother. Her grandmother was an educated woman, loved to read. And so we developed her character into the librarian for Last Chance Brides. And so that is a character that we are allowed to use within the world. So you'll see her come through in several stories. So that is an interconnected series where all the books are connected, meaning that you'll have bits and pieces that you'll see going from book A to book B to book C to D, etc., as opposed to these standalones, which are just written in a specific world.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, how you can work that so many different ways. Certainly gives you a lot of creative freedom.
Right. But going back to what your original question was how do you set that up and make sure that these authors write in that world is spreadsheets, documents, and contracts.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. And that's been largely successful for you. I mean,
it has been very successwill.
These series are huge. I think Proxy Brides is 80 plus books? Or will be.
Yeah, the Proxy Brides is 80-something books. The Pinkerton Matchmaker was 80-something books. If you combine the Blizzard Brides and Last Chance Brides, that's going to be about 100 books.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah. So it adds up, and the readers really love these longer series, and they love the consistency that they know a book is going to be released on, for example, every other Tuesday. I certainly remember when I was younger and I was reading romance novels that would come out. My favorite author would release, say, for example, in January. I normally had to wait until September before I would get another book from that author if she had something on the publishing schedule. Or sometimes I'd have to wait 2 years to wait to read something. And it would kill me because I'd be reading the book and I'd be like, well, what's going to happen to the brother? Or I want to know what's going to happen to the cousin, or, and then I'd have to wait so long. And by that time, either I'd forget about it or, I'd be so mad at my author, I'd go off and read something else. So the reader really gets invested in this because there's not a long wait between books. And then there's not a long wait between series because as we end one series, we're looking for where do we put the reader next. So we're always thinking about the reader experience. It's all about the reader experience.
That's great. It's interesting too. You're keeping them on a schedule, kind of, and like you said, they really like that. They kind of need that. So there's really no such thing as too much.
I wouldn't go that far. I would not go that far because there is such a thing as too much. I mean, we have heard from readers that sometimes the stories do become repetitive because there's only so many stories that you can tell. And Rick, you've been in this industry long enough where I think that I've read somewhere that there's only 7 stories in the world, and then all the stories are a variation of those 7 stories.
Yeah.
So there's only so many ways that you can tell the same stories. When you get into some of these series that are, 80 books long, for example, you're going to start getting into a little bit of repetition, and it's really difficult to make sure that you keep the stories fresh.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right. And so we realize that a reader may have difficulty keeping up with a series that is 52 books long or longer than that. And some projects are only 12 books long, and they do very well. But then the reader's like, okay, well, I've read these 12 books. Where am I going to go to next? So we want to keep them in the world. We want to keep them invested in our characters. We want them to say, well, you know what? I really want to know what happened to these people. And what was interesting from the Blizzard Brides into the Last Chance Brides is the Blizzard Brides focused on this group of women who were absolutely devastated when the storm came. They all ended up being widows. They had to send for mail order grooms. Last Chance Brides focuses on a drought that has devastated the countryside, so they don't have food. They're looking for water so they can grow their crops. But the women and the men that are in those stories are the children of the characters that were in the Blizzard Brides. Okay. So it is a next generation type of story.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about that, how you said it was 15 or more years later. So that's the obvious way to keep it fresh, because then you get to see how the love interest investment turned out.
Correct. Yeah. Right. And one thing I love about the authors that I work with, because the authors that are in the Blizzard Brides and Last Chance Brides and all of the projects that I work on are top-notch. They're top-notch authors. I've vetted their writing style. I've worked with them before. They all have reputations in the industry. They can bring in characters from their own series. So, for example, when I developed the Pinkerton Matchmaker, I created a couple that was very centric to all of the books, and that was Archie Gordon and Marianne Chapman. And when I was developing their characters in the books that I was writing for them, because they were in this tug of war that they were just denying their attraction to each other, I fell in love with Marianne Chapman because she came from a big family. She had strong family values. She was no nonsense. She wasn't putting up with anything. And she just kept putting Archie in his place. And then finally she threw up her hands in there and says, okay, well, that's it. I'm done with you. And, if this is where you're going to be, then so be it. And then he realized what he had lost. But I looked at her backstory and I said, well, this is interesting because, of course, when she got upset, she went back home to go visit her mom. And Marmee ended up becoming this beloved character who took on a life of her own. She is the matriarch of this small little town in Nebraska. Everybody knows her. Everybody listens to her. You better not cross her. And just Flat River, Nebraska ended up exploding. So I have these characters that I have built that have just shown up in all of these different series who make these cameo debuts. And in my last book for Last Chance Bride, which is A Chance for Maeve, which is coming out in April, Archie and Marianne's son is going to be my main male character in that series. So he is actually coming to Last Chance. So I'm tying in my Pinkerton Matchmakers into my Last Chance series. So I'm hoping to get a new group of readers interested in the Pinkerton Matchmakers. But I see a lot of the authors, and it's something that we do allow, or at least I allow as a coordinator. I know some coordinators don't, but I'm like, bring your characters in. Bring your characters in. We want the readers to be able to know you, as an author. We want the readers to be able to know you as your characters. We want the readers to be able to care about your characters, to care about these characters and say, you know what, I really liked this character. I want to find out more about them, and I want to find out more about their family, and I want to find out more, about what makes them tick. And so we can then lead them. Again, it's the reader experience. Where do we lead the reader to next?
Yeah, and I was just thinking about that as you were talking about it. It's a dynamic experience because you're kind of, like you said, a minor character. You're kind of basing their future on the feedback you get from readers, right? So, yeah, you just introduce someone once and you never know, they could end up being the main character of a new series at some point.
Correct.
It's great that you can be that flexible with it.
Right. Or they could die a horrible death because the reader's like, I just hate this series. And you're like, okay, well, we're not going to be doing it anymore.
Well, there you go. More drought and famine and snowstorms.
Yeah. And they just rode off into the sunset. Yeah, the train's not going to that town.
Well, okay, so we know some of your series. Can you give us a website or some social media places we can find you at?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go onto Facebook and you type in Christine's Chatters, Christine, Chatters, Chatters, that'll take you directly to my reader page or to my reader group. And you can join there, and that'll tell you everything about the series that are coming up. You can also type in Chat, Sip, and Read, and that'll take you to my page where I post all of my current books. I post what's coming up. And those are the best two places to find me. My website is currently under development, but as soon as we get that, I know that you guys will be posting that on my Barr26 author page.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Christine, this has been fascinating. Thank you for all the insight.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I know that we went a little over time, but I just love this topic and I could talk about it all day long.
I could too. Well, this has been fun, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Absolutely.
For more.
Thank you so much.
All right.